All right. Well, welcome to the Raj and Drew Show for entrepreneurs. We are talking about entrepreneurial excellence today. And specifically, we're talking about responsibilities and mindset. Raj, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Drew. Thank you for asking. This is a very, very important podcast or the video, whoever wants to watch, because if you are an entrepreneur, you don't want to miss this.
Absolutely. I'm excited to see this. Now, I've been working with Raj for a long time, and one of his most preferred communication tools is a slide, right? A presentation.
Yes.
That was built into you in the corporate world, I imagine. And it's such a great communication tool. So for those of you watching on YouTube and other platforms, you see a slide in front of you. This is something that Raj has taught for years, something that he's shared with his clients, and he's revealing with all of us today. So we get to see it. If you're not watching, you're just listening, let me give you a quick overview of this slide. I'm just going to hit the main points, and then Raj, you're going to jump in and really explain it to us. But it's entrepreneurial excellence, responsibilities, and mindset. I'm just going to give you the 6 responsibilities that are on this slide. And Raj is really going to deep dive us into how the mindset really separates the entrepreneurs that are out there just entrepreneuring and those that are really succeeding and capturing more market share. And so the 6 responsibilities that we're going to talk about today are: number 1, setting direction; number 2, aligning people; 3, mobilizing your team; 4, engaging mastermind alliances. That's a fun one. We're going to talk about that. Number 5, connecting with stakeholders; and number 6, enhancing personal effectiveness. So Raj, jump in here. Point number 1, we've got the responsibility, it's setting direction, but what is that mindset that goes along with this? Or explain setting direction from your perspective.
So if you look at an entrepreneur, and when we talk about entrepreneur excellence, one of the biggest thing is growth. And whenever you go back and look at it, there are people who set the direction. That is the reason why they become entrepreneurs and they set the direction. But are they being very, very bold about how they set the direction? That is where the mindset comes into picture. So if you look at it from setting the direction, and if you are very, very bold, the first piece is the vision. What is the vision you're setting up for yourself? And is the vision a game changer for you? So last year, I was basically mentoring one of them who was the grandson of a company. Basically, the grandfather started the company, the father works there, the grandson works there. The grandson is not even, he is less than 30 years old.
Okay.
Very, very young. But with some coaching and mentoring for him, in a span of 3 months, he could go back and convince his grandfather to become the president of the organization.
Wow.
So this was less than 12 months ago. And the company was approximately, the division he took over was about $7 million. And then we were talking about some of those things and stuff. And he set up a vision. And I said, you need to set up something bigger vision. And when we discussed about it in mentoring and stuff, as of 2 weeks ago, he gave me an update today, is he closed a deal and he has become a $13 million company.
Wow.
So that is what it is. You see, aligned with it, all of them were really skeptical about so much of growth. They were all thinking of incremental. But for the last 6 to 7 months, he was pushing for it. And now he has got the signed contract. Everything is set in place. And they're going to be a $13 million company. So and he said, Raj.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in 90 days, he wants to go back and establish everything else. And then he's setting aside for another $5 to $10 million. And he's going after a deal like that.
So just so folks listening or watching understand this, setting direction, we have to do that as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. We know that. We got to set direction. And you're saying the mindset we have to have is to be bold. Now, do I just do Grant Cardone and just 10x whatever idea I have? How do we develop a boldness, or how do we... is it different for every person? Some people are already more bold, and if you're not as bold, then try to be more bold. If you're really bold, maybe dial it back. Or kind of how do we navigate and almost measure ourselves on our boldness?
So one of the biggest part of it is you want to understand who you are as a business. What are your strengths and weaknesses? So think of the SWOT tool.
Okay.
And when you are so comfortable with your strength, like this particular example, basically he was exploring so many different businesses. But in the coaching, I started focusing back and saying, what are your strengths and where do you want to go? Mm-hmm. And that is what, instead of diversifying and thinking about so many other things, we went back and narrowed down what their strength was, what their sweet spot was, and then go back and say, who is available in the market and how do you expand that? So you always want to understand what your strengths are, based on that, what is your sweet spot, and then go after it. Because what happens is you can be much more bolder when you know that I can deliver. You know that these are my strengths and this is what I bring to the table.
That's good.
And that is one of the biggest piece of it. And the second part of it is you always think and say, why are we in this business? When you understand the strengths and everything else, money is very critical. If not, the company cannot grow.
Absolutely.
But what are some of the reasons behind that? It is almost like a purpose statement. Purpose is never defined in money, dollars and cents. You go back and say, what is the purpose beyond going money? And if everybody's aligned around that, it becomes a huge piece of it.
I love it. That's good. So really understand your own business and figure out where you can be bold because you have a track record of being successful in an area. So double down on it almost. Really go all in on that, get focused, and then you can be comfortable being bold because you know where you're good at.
Exactly. And then you develop a strategy to make the vision a reality. See, vision always is more of a futuristic thinking. Now you go back and say, how do I go back and get a strategy around it so that I can make it a reality?
Absolutely.
And here you want to take the bold steps, but there is a consistency in it. You want to be consistent in what you're doing. At the first setback or a first challenge or something doesn't work, you don't want to retrace your steps. You want to be consistent about it and that comes from your strength because you're working with your strengths and you understand yourself much better.
Yeah.
The second piece of it, go ahead.
Well, what I'm hearing is be bold, but be thoughtful. You have to be thoughtful in your approach. That's where the strategy comes in. You're refining it. You're really thinking into how you're going to do it.
Yes. And then you start excelling in forecasting things. Looking at the insights, learning from the past, looking from the environment, things like that are all built into your strategy and start forecasting what you can do.
I love it. Go ahead.
And then basically one of the things is as an entrepreneur, you want to take bold, but you really want to understand your risks and make sure that the downside is not huge. So you need to manage your downside if something doesn't go wrong. If somebody is saying nothing can go wrong, then they are being naive. Because there are always going to be risks, but we need to understand that piece of it and you need to work from that.
Yeah. I think that's huge. I mean, understand like what happens if you get zero return on marketing efforts that you invested in, right? Can you handle that? Can your business still survive if you put a bunch of money out to promote a product that ends up falling flat on its face? You have to think about those things. You have to think about those realities.
Exactly.
That's
that
good.
Becomes the second piece of it is the strategy piece of it. And now the third piece of it is the most important piece is, do you have the right resources and are you allocating the right resources for it? And this is where I tell most of my clients is think like an outsider. If somebody from the outside comes and looks at your business, would they allocate the resources? The reason is we develop some basically habits. Some might be good, some might be not. We always go with our personal preferences, what worked in the past, whatever criteria we have. That's the reason why I bring in the outside, basically mindset, and you bring in the outside in thinking and start looking at it. And the biggest piece I tell people is when you have a bold vision and a strategy, don't think of last year budgets. Don't think of that. You use that as a reference and knowledge perspective. But if you go back and look at it from a fresh perspective, how much budget would you allocate to that piece of it? If you look at the last budget, they'll say, okay, last year I spent X. This year is going to be X plus 5% or 10%. Then you are not being bold. You are really setting up the resource allocation, but you're doing year over year 5% growth, 3% growth, or 10%. But when you're being bold, you're going back and saying that, you know what, I'm going to look at this very differently. That's how this company from $6.57 million to go back and become a $13 million company.
Fresh eyes.
Exactly. And that becomes very, 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 very important. And once you go back and look at it, you look at resources from people, you look at it resources from equipment, whatever business you are in, and basically you're looking at it from your funds as well, and make sure you allocate the right funds to it.
That's
and
fantastic.
Then make sure that basically KPIs are set, metrics are set up, and the metrics has to be monitored on a regular basis.
Perfect.
So that way now you have the vision, you have a strategy, and then you have the resources. A combination of those can help you to be as bold as you can be. And you can start measuring things.
Perfect. So that covers setting direction, and then the mindset with that is being bold. Yes. And the second responsibility that entrepreneurs have is aligning people. So what's the mindset with this, Raj?
So before that, I want to make one point before we go down to the aligning the people piece of it. Basically, the key metrics, and when you're looking at the metrics, one of the biggest thing is you need to be very, very decisive and kill the projects that are not performing. So you set up the metrics and say, these are the expectations, this is what it is. And then you go back and kill the projects. You don't wait on it for too long and then take the funds and allocate it to something else. So generally I tell people is you look at it from the first 90 days kind of a thing, and then make an objective decision. If this is
That's
not
what
working,
I was going to ask you.
Yes.
Is if you have a time frame.
Yeah. Generally, I go back
days.
and tell them is these are the expectations. This is what we need to do. And we create that upfront. Let us say I have a new product. And I said, hey, the new product in first 90 days, I need to go back and make X dollars in revenue. If it is not happening and stuff, and you don't see a lot of support from the field and customers are not related to it and stuff, hey, it might be a pet project, but kill it. Look at all the other projects, take the funds allocated to that. That is being bold as well. So I just want to make sure there is a lot of good upside, but there is basically a downside to it. And we need to be very, very decisive from the downside point of view.
That's good. Not getting caught in, I guess, when I think about your strategic roadmap, the tool that you have that we use, it's a living document, right?
Yes.
Meaning
Yes.
it can change, it can evolve based on changing conditions. And that's your responsibility as the leader to use your intuition, use your experience, use all the tools available to you to navigate those challenging times. And that's really what separates all of us, right? Because we all have the same information essentially available to us, but how are we modifying our approach? How are we making decisions, those tactical decisions in the moment?
Yes, very, very critical. Very, very critical.
Perfect. I'm glad you mentioned that. All right. Aligning people.
So this is the biggest piece of it. Basically, when you are aligning people, the biggest priority is the soft skills. Everybody talks about soft skills, but those are the toughest one to go back because anything else is measurable. You can easily do it. But people skills, soft skills, competencies are so difficult because each one of us is so unique and different.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, you look at the culture piece of it, the organizational design, and the talent piece of it. So one of the first things I go back and work with my people is I tell them to go back and build a culture. And one of the biggest question everybody says, Raj, what is the culture? So when people go back and do and what are acceptable things in the organization, that is culture.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I always mentor and coach all the entrepreneurs is think of it from 5 different elements. The first piece of it is what is your vision, which we have already done in the setting the direction. What is your purpose? And here we go back and say, what are the values that you want to go back and distribute? Mm-hmm. So I generally recommend about 5 values. Some people have a few more, some people have a less, but the values are very, very important. And one of the new things, these 3 things are pretty standard and common with most of the companies. But the 2 elements we go back and work with is accountabilities. So as every single leader in the company, there are certain accountabilities we define and we say these are non-negotiable with all the leadership team. When I say leadership team, anybody who has a direct report, that is how I define leadership. And then we have the norms. So the norms with the accountabilities and the values, that becomes the culture over a period of time. If everybody is embracing and everybody is comfortable with it, that becomes the culture.
Yeah.
So the first thing is we need to start defining those things.
Absolutely.
And then you can go back and design the org structure. So you're going to use the culture piece of it or the accountabilities, norms, and values from the recruitment all the way to firing. That becomes huge piece of it. Now, the whole environment at work is driven by that piece of it. And the entrepreneur and his direct reports should be behaving in such a way that everybody can adapt it. And it should reflect the culture they want it to be. So they have to be the role models for the company.
Absolutely. Well, and let me say this about culture. Some people say culture is defined as that's just how we do things around here. And I think that's good, but I think there's even a deeper level of kind of why we do things this way around here. And that's where you get into what's called or termed the residue of success. Culture can be considered the residue of success, meaning if someone has found that if they yell at somebody when they're frustrated and they get what they want, then that becomes a residue of success in your organization. Yes. If you have a cultural norm or an accountability that says at the first sign of a problem, we reach out to whoever we report to and we tell them that we might not be able to hit the deadline, then that would be an accountability that, hey, if you don't think you're going to hit your deadline, you have to reach out as soon as possible. Yes. And when people do that and then they get help and the project, goes through on time, that's another residue of success that points back and says, this is how we do things around here. And this is why. So exactly. I just wanted to say that maybe to help some people out there. That term really helped me out in understanding culture.
Yes. And just to share an example from my GE days, One of the things I learned about GE and the culture piece of it is, let us say I know I cannot meet a deadline, some deadline, let us say June 30th as an example. I can't meet the deadline and today is only 3rd and I know that I cannot meet it. If I go to my boss and really ask for help and explain that, then we have 27 days to do something about it.
Yes.
If it is a resource issue, it is a funding issue, whatever the case might be. But if I go to him on the 29th and say I can't do it, even if he wants to help, there is nothing we can do.
Yeah.
And that is the culture they have built. The first thing my boss told me when I was a long time ago was that, Raj, if you have a problem, let me know the time you know. You can fix it, but don't think that I can manage it and fix it without help. We are all here to help because at the end of the day, it is an organizational goal, department goal, company goal.
Yeah.
And that is how you build that culture piece of it.
That's good.
And the next one is the organizational design. One of the things is we want to design an organization that is very, very, very steady. You don't want it to be swinging across extremes. And the second piece of it is you really want to go back and look at it from stable versus agile. And let me explain that. If you want to have another thing, if you look at your R&D department, if you look at some of the certain functions, you want them to be agile. Agile being is changing very fast, being that piece of it. If you are in the operations piece of it, if you are in the product service delivery piece of it, customer service, then you want the stability piece of it where it is very, very consistent. So you want that flexible organization where you understand where stability is required, where agility is required, and then you build your organization that way. And that becomes very, very critical. And then from a talent piece of it, and this is one of the things I have noticed. In fact, there is a great article that is coming out next Wednesday. I spent quite some time and put all my 3 years of research into a blog that will be released day after tomorrow.
Wonderful.
On the talent piece of it. So the culture piece, what we have built is very important. And then you're going to go back and start hiring the people. And when you go back and want to hire the right people, don't start with people. Start with what is that you want these people to do. So one of the things what we tell them is come up with what we call a 3D job description. You want to go back and say, what are the key accountabilities for the role? What are the main important tasks they need to be? And how are we going to measure success? Those are the 3 dimensions of that. Once we have that, then we can go back and say, how do we recruit these people? So we can have a psychometric profile. Psychometric profile involves what are the behaviors for success? What are the driving forces that are required for success? What are the competencies, soft skills that they require for the role? Then you have the technical skills, and then you have the experiences. You start defining all of those even before you start, don't talk to anybody. And small businesses, I tell, you don't need to do for everything. At least you know there are 4, 5, 6 critical roles that a company depends on. At least do for those roles to start with as we are growing. And then we go back and start interviewing. And one of the mantra I tell people is when you're looking at talent, hire slow, fire fast.
Yes.
Very, very important. And I tell people is all of my clients, my advice is interview at least 4 times, any position, because you're looking at critical roles, you want to do that. First interview, just focus on their basically the experiences and skills they have. The second part of it, go back and look at the culture map. We call it hiring for fit. Do they fit into our culture? Do they fit into our values, accountabilities, norms? That is the second piece of it. And the third, we go back and look at it from a psychometric profile. Once we have all of those things, then all of my clients, they go back and use the assessment. They go back and look at it and do a trimetrics assessment, and combining all of those informations, you come back for a 4th thing. And that is where they go back and make a decision. So people think of the time it takes, but if you look at the expense, right? So a lot of people say, oh, it is cheap, it is expensive, but all the studies I have done, it is a minimum of 6 months of their annual salary. That is something, if an employee leaves, that is what you have lost.
Yeah, in turnover costs.
In turnover cost, indirect, direct costs, everything else. So are you willing to spend 4 or 5 hours upfront, or are you going back and sacrificing 6 months of paychecks? So that is a decision they need to make.
Yeah. Well, and don't settle. I mean, that's the biggest thing is don't settle because you have a hole. It's your team gives you so many times to make a bad hire until they think you're an absolute fool and they don't want to work for you anymore.
Exactly.
and we've all been there. We've all been the one on the team and we go, really, why did they hire this person or why did they promote this person? And so you want to make sure that you're hiring the right people and promoting the right people in your team, because your team is judging you based on how well you hire and how well you promote. So it's very important from a cultural standpoint to recognize that for sure.
Yes. And just for that, because we have what we call a growth as a process, and the month of July is so critical. And in July, every year, basically, there is succession planning and a lot of talent management goes on every single year. You're looking at all the critical roles, you're looking at all your critical leaders, and how do you go back and see that? Because by the time you have your 3-year plan, at least the direction you want to go.
Yeah.
So you always have an opportunity and say, hey, you know what? This person is great for a $10 million company, but the capacity is maxed out. He cannot be very good for a $25 million company. Mm. So I see a lot of those things coming and they say, Raj, training. No, sometimes they don't want to be there and they don't have the capability to go there because we're all human beings and we need to identify that. So they can be in a different role or they can be in a role and bring somebody above them.
Yeah.
And those are the tough decisions, but they should be really spending a lot of quality time in it. So I encourage all of my clients to go back and use July as basically your people month. You're looking at the long-term strategies and succession planning and everything else and seeing where the talent is.
That's good. That's a good practice.
Yes. And that is how basically this whole aligning people piece of it works.
It's perfect. Are we ready for step 3?
Yes.
All right. So step 3 is you want to mobilize the team. So break that down for us, Raj.
So if you go back and look at it, right, one of the biggest mindset is, are you tapping into the human psychology? And the word we use, the human psychology, is you want to get all of these people to work. Like if you go back and bring people with different skills and different talents and everything else, right? But now they need to work as a team.
Okay.
If you look at any of the sports, some of the sports teams have superstars, but they never go to the Super Bowl or in the NBA championship or the World Series or something like that, because they got great talent, but they're all not mobilizing them. So the team composition really plays a big role here. And here we need to go back and look additional to the skill. How are they compatible with each other and really help them with it? So that is what
you're talking about going back to the assessments and seeing their driving forces, their human behavior style, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So one of the biggest things we do with these people is dynamic communication. How do you bring all these people and really understand the dynamic communication and understand each other's behaviors, driving forces, competencies and stuff so that they can work with each other and understand each other at a deeper level. And that becomes very powerful.
Yeah, I think it's powerful when you go through exercises with your team and I know your report talks about this, the various strengths and then challenge areas, weaknesses, whatever you want to call them, but we all have different roles to play, right? We all have different things where we're going to shine, different areas, skills, behaviors, skills for sure, where we're going to shine, and then skills and competencies where we're just weak. And that's okay as long as we're aware of them and somebody else on the team or in some other way we can kind of shore up that weakness. But the strength piece, it's very, it's liberating to be on a team where you can freely talk about what you're great at and then areas where you're not great, and everybody knows and different people can pick up the slack where they're strong and they enjoy doing the work and others don't. I've been on a team like that and it's a fantastic place to be.
Yes. And just an example, basically you might have a couple of superstar salespeople. They'll go back and they do the sales, they do almost 2x, 3x the goals they have. But their weakness might be is submitting basically their bills on time, doing the T&L, travel and living expenditure, some of those things. Because I had somebody whom I knew very well is outstanding. He always did 5x the average salesperson. But you know what? When it comes to paperwork and all of those things, basically it is all scattered. He's not very good at it. So there, everybody says we need to push him to train. I said, no, because his strength is sales. Let us go back and ask him to sell, and you to motivate him to do 20% more, he'll do it. And then give him an assistant or somebody who can go back and do the paperwork for him. And that is what we go back and talk about here. He's very open and saying, you know what, you want another 20% increase in sales, I can do that.
Yeah.
But take this away from me.
That's a good deal.
Each one of them
for a
need
business
to understand
owner, depending on what you're selling.
Exactly. But again, each department, each function can have. Sales is very easy. That's why I'm using that as an example. Like there are certain operations people that are very good with running their production and operations and everything else, but they struggle with some of the statistical tools and analysis. Perfectly fine. You run this piece of it. We'll have a production manager or a supervisor or somebody reporting to you who are very good at it.
Yeah.
Because in my GE days, basically for us to transform our two critical things. One was change management. One was Six Sigma tools. And my boss recruited me and said, Raj, I have zero Six Sigma skills, but I am one of the best in change management. That's the reason why I'm bringing you. You're good at change management, but you're outstanding in Six Sigma. Our combination should change our whole division. And that is what it is. So he recognized that at a level, and then he brought the right person to work with him.
Yeah.
And in 18 months, we totally changed how we were looking at Six Sigma.
Getting the right people on the right seat in the bus, right? That's what
Exactly.
Good to Great taught us.
Exactly. Jim Collins always say that. Make sure the right people are on the bus, and then make sure they are in the right seats. And that's how you get the engagement. That is how you get all the leaders or employees connected to each other. And that takes to the second piece of it is the teamwork. Because if everybody is doing this, automatically the teamwork is working very good.
Mm-hmm.
And always focus on basically the teams should be stronger than the individual strengths.
Absolutely.
That is one of the things I would go back and look at it all the time. So if you look at from 2000 to almost 2018-19, the New England Patriots, the football team,
mm-hmm.
they never had really solid superstars in the football team. They had good utility players and they had one or two, somebody who are above average. But if you look at it, they won 6 Super Bowls during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the power of teamwork. So we need to go back and see if all the collective strengths and skills of all the people is synergistic so that we can get the maximum output. And that becomes huge here.
Yeah.
And the team dynamics, that is the reason why we invest enough time on the assessments, the dynamic communication, everything else, so that basically the team dynamics are huge and we constantly invest on the team dynamics so that they are very, very univision. They understand the vision, they understand the goals, they understand the KPIs, and they start focusing and delivering on that.
Yeah. I mean, people want to be successful at work. I think that's something that business owners, entrepreneurs maybe forget, is that something that people want to do when they come in every day is they want to be successful in what it is they do. And if they know that they're on a good team, they're all going in the right direction, they're experiencing success along the journey, then that cohesion is just going to build. They're going to get tighter as a team. And then, you put the assessments in there just from the human behavior standpoint. If you can sell a team, in my experience, what I've seen, if you can sell a team on, communicating in a way that the person you're trying to communicate with will best receive that information, and everybody reciprocates and does that on a team, that's a great place to be, because now you're working together, you're meeting each other's needs from a communication standpoint, and everything is just clicking on all cylinders.
Yes. And to enable that, we need an operating rhythm. So the cadence for communication, the cadence for meeting, cadence for really reviewing the results and everything else, because this structure will really help us for decision making.
Yeah.
So depending on what it is, you might have weekly meetings, you might have daily meetings, you can have monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, and annual meetings at different levels for different things. So what happens is there is a cadence of communication. People are interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
There is a pace of things. Each person is understanding what someone else is doing.
Yeah.
And even if there are some challenges or opportunities, they're realizing and talking to each other on a constant basis. And each person's alignment comes to life because now they know, you know what? They are having a problem. If I do something here and I'm missing my mark, it is going to affect this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let us say a product development person, they're delaying their product development by 3 months. Immediately, the sales can't sell it. The marketing people are wasting budgets because there is no product to sell if they market it.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those coordination piece of it can bring to the surface depending on the frequency and the cadence of the communication piece of it and the results and sharing that. And with setting the direction, aligning the people, all of those will bring here, and now it will become a great operating rhythm.
Yeah. And I think being willing to shift or adapt your operating rhythm as required, if there's someone on your team that's leading a very important product launch, you might need to meet with them every day for a couple of weeks leading up to that to make sure that they have all the information they need to go out and execute on this vital component. And I think sometimes leaders that I've coached with, they get all in their head about it. And is this fair? I'm meeting with them more often, and not what's the rest of the team going to think? Look, you're trying to move the ball across the goal line. We've got to achieve the goal. And if it requires you to spend a little extra time with a person on your team, to make sure they have all the information they need or whatever it is. Be free to do it so that you can move the organization forward. And I just don't let those things slow you down if it gets out of your ordinary rhythm. Sometimes you have to switch things up in order to achieve the goal.
And that's the whole purpose. Like you said, it can be daily and sometimes even every hour. If it is a safety issue or something and it is an emergency crisis, you might be talking every half hour, 1 hour.
Yeah.
Or you go back and say, you know what, things are moving very smoothly. This department, this function, you can meet only once a month.
Mm-hmm.
So this cadence and operating rhythm will really help us to go back and identify and address issues very, very early. Or celebrations, if something is going very well and we want to go back and put resources there.
Exactly. And if you have a weekly meeting and you don't have much to say that week, you can always end the meeting early.
Exactly.
No one's going to fault you for that.
No, we used to have that, and we used to have meetings for 15 minutes, though we scheduled an hour.
Yeah.
And you go back and say, hey guys, you got 45 minutes, go back and use the time to reflect and think and plan.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very nice, healthy time during the day so that they can think and reflect.
Yeah.
So that's how basically the whole 3 steps, really, starting with the direction, then with the people, and then working the people as a team. Those are the 3 pieces that are very, very critical for an entrepreneur to look at it. And what you notice is for success, we're not talking about product, we're not talking about success, because people really will determine that.
Yeah.
I don't know who one of the successful business people's person mentions this, is saying that is culture eats strategy for lunch. So I'm not sure who the person was, but that was one of the statements I always look at it. And that's how the first 3 steps, responsibilities and mindset, is all around that piece of it.
Yeah, that's good. And like you said, the whole stages of growth process is predicated on this idea that businesses get more complicated, not with more revenue, but with more people on the team. And the more people you have on the team, the more complicated it gets. And I think AI is going to prove that out. As we see more, as AI agents begin to come on and do more work for our businesses, you'll realize that, hey, these bots are pretty easy to work with, and they don't complicate things that much. We set it and get it going and kind of monitor it from time to time. But people are difficult. People have life issues, people have challenges, people have shortcomings. All of us do. And it adds a level of complication the more people you add. And that's why they're always going to continue to write leadership books, because it's not a settled science. People are going to be different from every generation, from every culture and every background and every life experience, from how they grew up in home and learned to communicate. And so that's where that complication comes. I think it's so important to have those up front. Let's focus on these and make sure we have the right people so that we can move forward to achieve the goal.
Yes.
Perfect. So are we ready for step 4?
Yeah. So here I want to go back. We talk about the mastermind. It's all about how do you create value. And one of the things, the reason I use the word mastermind here is there are some organizations which are growing. As an entrepreneur, you might be only having 20, 30 employees. And for them, mastermind is a much better way of it. Now, if you have 100 employees, 200 employees, 300 employees, then you can get your own private board of directors.
Yeah.
So I'm using the word mastermind here, and can be replaced with a board if you're big enough as a company and you can afford it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people try to go back and get volunteers to be on the board. And what I tell people is it is okay to get volunteers. But if you really want to maximize the value piece of it, get some paid board of directors. They might be there willing to work, because you're bringing a lot of experienced people into that.
Yeah.
So if you're going to pay them now, it is no obligation there. They have a job to do. They go back, they're getting compensated. Even if it is small enough, not equivalent to that, there is enough motivation there. That is what I have noticed. When they have boards with really no compensation in place versus boards with compensation, the results were significantly different.
I can see that, because you want share of their thinking time. Of those board members. And you don't want them just to show up and only be thinking about it when they're there in the meeting. You want them to take some time, reflect, and think into how they can help grow the business and lead it in the direction that you've set. So yeah, absolutely. So, but you're using the term mastermind. So when you're talking about a mastermind, You're talking about people around your life, though, that can speak into your life, whether that's a coach or a fellow. Is that right? Am I here understand that right?
It's a combination. It's a
Okay.
combination of it. So the biggest part of it, the goal of this whole fourth piece is how are we going back and getting external knowledge to go back and improve our teams? That is the first
Okay.
thing. I want to make sure what is the purpose of this.
Gotcha.
Then you can go back. A mastermind can be almost like an entrepreneur. You can go back and have a group of 10, 12 entrepreneurs and work with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I always recommend no more than 8, because after that it becomes chaotic.
Yeah.
Ideally 6 to 8 people in your mastermind is good. And the first thing is you need to make sure everybody trusts each other there. They need to have one of those things. What happened in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? That is the kind of trust they need to have.
Yeah.
And the second part of it is once you build the trust, they need to be very, very transparent. This is all under the relationship piece of it.
Okay.
If you're not going to be transparent, then you can't get the right help. And that is the other piece of it and stuff. And then you got to be the chair or drive that piece of it so that you get maximum value.
Mm-hmm.
Or have a rotation chair where every meeting or every other meeting is given to a different person so that everybody in the mastermind gets value.
Yeah.
And then the last piece of it is when you find some good people, you can go back and give access to some of your direct reports so that they can encourage and they can learn from the mastermind and some of the people as well. We have seen that a lot happening when you have board of directors, paid board of directors, then that value piece is huge. I'm part of a board here, and I always go back and mentor at least 1 or 2 people every quarter or every other quarter, just to go back and have access to it and give them what are their challenges. And I get a very different perspective so that I can help them better.
Yeah. Well, so and I know I've had coaching clients of small businesses or even small nonprofits. And, one of the big pieces in that relationship is that they don't have anybody they can talk to. Right. And many times that's entrepreneur. It's known for being a very lonely road when you're an entrepreneur. Right? Nobody understands what I'm trying to do. Jeff Bezos has a famous quote, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to be okay with being misunderstood for a long amount of time, right?
Yes.
And that's the thing, is that you do want to get around like-minded people that have a desire to grow, develop, further themselves, reach their full potential, however you want to say it. They're driving themselves, they're driven on their own. And you want other people that get the mindset. We're talking about responsibilities and mindset. They get the mindset of an entrepreneur, because you can have great quality people, but if they're coming from a completely different frame of reference, sometimes it can get old explaining, why you're doing what you're doing on every single decision. Sometimes you want somebody that understands a baseline of where you're coming from and what you're trying to accomplish. And that's what I see in the value of this mastermind, these external folks. You want to be external, but you also want them to, I think, have an understanding of where you're coming from and what you're trying to do.
Yes. And that is the reason why the second bullet, capabilities, becomes very important. You said it right there. So you want to go back and have the mastermind or the board of directors, I'm using the word interchangeably for our discussion, is do we have the right people in the board?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going into technology, I really want somebody who is pioneering in technology and get the people who have a lot of experience. If I'm looking for, saying, funding and stuff like that, I want good finance people on this thing. So each one of those things. So the whole purpose of step 4, the responsibility is we want to have more futuristic viewpoint, thinking about the future rather than problem solving. You can always get somebody to solve your problems, or you can do that. But the biggest part of it is you want people who are looking at the future, because you're always uncharted territory is the future, because you might have not been there. You don't know how to get there, and you're bringing people who have been there.
Yeah.
Like one of my clients recently was hiring a chief operating officer. They're a $600 million company and they want to be $1 billion. So we wrote the job description such that we are hiring somebody who has been there, done that, and they have worked at least for $1 billion, 1.2, 1.5 billion operating system, so that he or she can bring that piece to them. If I bring another person with 500, 600, they need to go back and learn from trial and error again.
Yeah.
And that is what entrepreneurs need to look at it from that point of view. And that is where the capabilities come. Basically, go back and take some time. Like we do the job description piece of it, we want to go back and understand whom do we want to invite and what are some of the capabilities they need to bring to the table. And make sure that they understand some of our strategic plan, help them learn everything that we are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure that they're comfortable with that piece of it. And that is where the capabilities piece of it comes. And the third piece of it are the meetings piece of it. How are you going to engage in different meetings, and how are you running your meetings and the discussion point of it? And this is where I tell, if you don't build the relationship and the trust, and if you don't have the right people, then you get into trouble, because the meetings are very important. But if you're talking, let us say, Drew, you're fascinated about AI and everything else. If I'm on the board for an AI company, it'll be a disaster. I can ask some great open-ended questions, but I really don't have the experience or expertise to work with AI. But if you're talking about financial services, if you're talking about construction, you're talking about language services, I bring a lot of those expertise to the picture.
Yeah.
So that becomes very important. And those meetings are very critical and will be very, very productive if you do 1 and 2, relationship and capabilities are done. And second, if you don't focus on the future and focus on the past, you're wasting a lot of valuable time. Because you always want to bring your mastermind and everything else to discuss about strategic issues rather than tactical issues. That is what I noticed a lot of people. They bring people and they're talking about small tactical stuff. You are an entrepreneur. You bring in your team and you have the right people, you can take care of the tactical stuff.
Yeah.
Or get a consultant if that is very difficult. But this whole mastermind alliance board of directors is more from a strategic viewpoint.
Yeah, well, and I was in a meeting recently working on a project with a group, and just one individual that didn't seem to would get stuck, was just stuck on one area of this project that wasn't even part of the deliverables, but just couldn't get over this one part. And we spent a whole meeting listening to this individual go on and on and on about this component that isn't even a part of the project that we're working on. And you don't want that in your company. You don't want that kind of time suck, that time waste with an individual that just gets caught up in things that are of no importance to the ultimate goal. And that's where you, I think, get back into that capabilities piece, right? You want to make sure it's the right type of thinking. And because those meetings, right, those times that you get together, that you have to use relational credibility to get a group of people together. And even if you're paying them a little bit, hey, we're going to have our regular meeting. Okay, well, I hope this meeting's worthwhile. And that's what everybody's thinking. And if it's not because there's a contrarian just for the purpose of being contrarian, that's a waste of time. We don't need that.
Yes.
In my viewpoint.
No, it's very critical, because the board I am on, right, once a quarter we meet in person. In between, if we need to, we do the Zoom calls, but once a quarter we meet for sure in person. Yeah. And it is not like that. Basically, we have the customer's location is in Texas, but I'm flying from Connecticut. I have one of the other board member flying in from Spain. And there is somebody else from a different country in Europe. And then somebody is from Florida. Somebody is coming from California. So they are taking care of all this money and investing on that because they see so much value in that. Yeah. And every quarter they go back and systematically, they plan it. Like in January, the dates, everything are finalized, very well organized. Yeah, that's important when you're working with high caliber people. Exactly. Now, the next one, connect with the stakeholder, right? And connection is so important because we are looking at it from a long-term perspective. So like in one of the books, John Maxwell says, right, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go further, go with a team. And this is something like that. So you want the stakeholders to be completely aligned. And that's the reason why whenever you want to go back and have a purpose, you want it to be special so that you can harmonize the company goals with the employee goals with all the different stakeholders. Everybody should be on the same purpose. Yeah. So it can be your suppliers, it can be your employees, it can be your customers, it can be your board of directors, your mastermind, whoever it is, all of them has to be there. And their biggest thing is, why does the company exist? And how can we add value? That is the whole piece of it. That is how everybody should be connected. So what do you just have to be a Pied Piper? You're just a great visionary person and you just can kind of bring everybody along? Or how do you get these stakeholders really invested? That is the requirement. If you go back and look at it, what did we do in the first section? We went back and set up a very, very good vision. We set up a good purpose, the accountability stuff. So we are setting up our culture. And based on that, you have a strategy. Now you need to go back and use that to go back and bring in the right people. So if you're recruiting people, one of the recruitment I told you, right, basically make sure that it is a cultural fit. Yeah. And you're talking about all of those things, where the company is going, what is doing. If you're getting and recruiting a board member, go back and tell them the same thing. If you're recruiting a mastermind group, try to get people. So I want to grow by 50%, 100%. I don't want people who are thinking of linear growth of 3%, 5% year over year. No, that is not the wrong move. You want to bring people who are very, very interested in some monumental growth. And that is how you start aligning piece of it. Okay. So once you set up your direction, every single step, what you're doing should be viewed from that point of view.
Okay.
If they're not looking at it from that viewpoint, it's not going to happen.
Gotcha.
And that is the biggest piece of it from there. And basically the social impact. Right now, it has become more and more companies are really looking at it from a social impact aspect. And the more the millennials or whatever the next Gen X, Gen Y, whoever all
Gen
the
Z.
people are, Gen Z, all of these people are really more on purpose. They want the salary, everything else, but they really want to align themselves with some sort of a social cause. And that is very important for them because they're coming from a very different point of view.
Yeah.
So we need to go back and define that piece of it. And
That's
all
great.
of that would be understanding your special purpose.
Okay.
And now with the stakeholder relationships, develop some outstanding relationships, constantly keep on communicating with them. You always want to focus on engagements and making sure they're engaged with it. They're aligned with the company purpose. And the biggest thing I tell all the entrepreneurs is be very clear about why. Everybody knows what we want to accomplish. Everybody knows how to get it done, but the missing piece of why. Like Simon Sinek's, start with why. That is what I focus on here and make sure we bring that piece of it. Everybody should grasp why we are doing the things, the way we are doing things. And the consistent messaging and communication. Employees, it's easy because every day they see. But when you bring in the stakeholders, when you bring in the external people, there should be a constant communication so that it becomes second nature for them to go back and understand that. And the third piece of it, which is the most critical part of it, is moments of truth. And this is what I call the litmus test. How do you go back and respond during crisis? As an entrepreneur, we will see a lot of crisis, right?
Yeah.
Are we making the decisions? Are we moving away from our strategy? Are we moving away from our values and taking shortcuts? That is what I call the moments of truth. The companies and the leadership team who are trying to take shortcuts, they would really not be successful in the long-term perspective. But if they communicate and say, we are going to put a hold on something, that is okay. But you really want to be sticking to their core values and everything else, even during crisis. And that would be the biggest moment of truth for everybody else. And since if you do 1 to 4 very well, what happens during crisis period? What happens? Everybody races to the occasion. Everybody's comfortable because everybody is aligned. Now you can go back and have a crisis center or something or a group of people and say, you know what, how do we tackle this? And that becomes very good. And if all of this is done very well, moments of truth, then you become a very good, resilient organization.
Yeah. Well, and if you do the first 3 steps right, then your team won't be worn out with manufactured crisis. Because if you have toxic, bad people on your team, they create crisis moments weekly, if not daily, with the types of things that they do, their attitude towards supporting and being a part of the team. And that'll wear a team out. And then when a real crisis comes, they're too exhausted to deal with it. Whereas if you've taken care of that, you've created a good environment, you've made those investments in your team, now they want to reciprocate and they want to say, hey, you know what? The organization's invested in me. I believe in the vision. They've communicated why we're doing what we're doing. You know, COVID is happening, or, you know, market disruption or an economic downturn is happening. What do I need to do to jump in here and make sure that we hit the goal so we can all be here next week, next month, next year? And instead of, because the exact opposite could happen in that situation. A crisis comes and you might have everybody looking to jump ship and say, I'm putting in applications because I don't think we're going to be around, instead of digging in and trying to make sure that we're around tomorrow. And so that's the give and take. And that's why you have to invest in your team and be loyal to them and hope that they reciprocate when the time comes.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, basically everybody's good when your things are running very well. The litmus test is when you are in a crisis mode.
Absolutely.
And that is where the culture and everything becomes so critically important, as you mentioned.
Mike Tyson's famous for saying everybody has a game plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very powerful statement.
And I mean, I think that's why I like a lot of the mixed martial arts, is because it's one person's strategy versus another person's strategy. They're using their skills and this individual is using their skills, and it's one-on-one and 2 go in, 1 comes out. And it's, I know some people think it's barbaric and whatever. I can see the skill and the strategy behind what they're doing in mixed martial arts. And I think it's pretty amazing, because in what other area do you really have the ability to go one-on-one in that way? You know, there's a few sports, tennis and a couple others, but outside of that, I mean, you're on a team and you're working together. And so it's so interesting. And to try to think through, how do you respond when life punches you in the mouth? How do you respond when life punches your business in the mouth?
Exactly.
And what are you going to do? How are you going to respond or react in those moments? And everything that you do, once again, your team is watching you and they're making judgments about you.
Huge.
on if they think that was in the good column, that was in the bad column, that was
Yes.
they made a mistake, but they usually are good about that. Or see, this just proves the point that they're always do that whenever a hard time comes. And so it kind of leads us into this next one, right? Point number 6, which is enhance personal effectiveness, and take it from there. What's the mindset here for the CEO?
So when we go back and we're talking about entrepreneurs and CEOs, but it is applicable to all the senior leaders of a growing business. It can be for any business, any leader. But we focus more on the entrepreneur because the whole business and the enterprise depends on the entrepreneur.
Everything rises and falls.
Yes. And the first thing is we're talking about time and energy. So are we managing our time effectively? Are we managing our energy perfectly? And one of the biggest thing I tell people is you cannot manage time. You can only manage your priorities. You can manage your energy. Because at any given time, as an entrepreneur, basically you are an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur, and we know that there is always a laundry list of things that has to be done. But depending on the schedule and the time and everything else, we need to prioritize where we need to put what. And that's how we schedule. So that is the biggest piece of it is, are you toggling between busy times and taking some time to go back and regenerate yourself, relaxing yourself, reflecting and thinking about things? That becomes the number one piece of it. And the second piece of it is, sorry, go ahead.
Well, we were talking about John earlier, and one thing that really stuck out with John Maxwell when he said it was, on the energy management side of things, understanding when you have to be 100% and when there's times where you can kind of cruise, maybe more at 70%, 60%. There's the ebb and flow of the day. And you want to make sure that you understand in your day, when does your team need you to be 100%? Do you have to meet a certain client? And you don't want to have 50% energy when a client's coming in, when this is the meeting that your key salesperson wants you to have, shake their hand, smile, say something nice, and then they're going to be gone. Well, you better make sure that that's 100%, that you're giving that all you can, because that's revenue generating, right?
Yes.
And you can be a little lower energy as you're going through your emails or whatever it is you have to do throughout your day. But recognizing what are those times where you have to show up and you have to be at the best you can be in that moment. And that helped me kind of understand my day and my priorities.
Yes. And that is very, very important. And just to give you a simple example, I have a company where I've been working with and implementing our EGOS methodology. And every third Thursday of the month at 9:00, we have a review of all their projects and growth and status. That is a cadence for 12 months. So I don't plan anything before that. So I block off the calendar from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. because for 2 hours, we have intense discussions about it, their future, their growth, the projects, challenges, all of those things are there. So I go back and don't program anything before that. That is 9 to 11. And then I go back and block off 1 hour for lunch so that I'm ready for the next part of it. So until 12 on every Thursday, I know what the schedule is, and it is blocked all the way until December. That is the energy management. That is what John keeps on talking about. That is the most important piece.
Yeah, that you have to be 100% engaged in their business for those 2 hours. They're needing a lot of energy from you in those times. And so making sure that you're on for that, that's perfect illustration for that.
Yeah. And anytime I'm doing basically a Zoom training or workshop, basically I block off at least 1 hour before that. The reason being is there are going to be 20, 30, 40 people. We don't know how many people depending on the thing. And I just want to make sure that we are not coming with a very, very hectic schedule back to back, and you don't have breathing time before you start training people.
Yeah.
So that's very, very important. And all CEOs, and that is where prioritize CEO only tasks, they need to be very, very clear. So they've always prioritized strategic things, big items. Anything, if you look at it from 1 to 5, those has to be a top priority. And that is where they need to manage the time and energy piece of it. They should be in a position to compartmentalize things from one meeting to the other. They should be comfortable recharging themselves over a period of day as well, because all the decisions they make are much more significant compared to anybody else in the company.
Yeah.
And the biggest what I tell people is, if you do number 2 and 3 very, very well, and you have a great group of people, that makes your life much more easy. If you have a good people to delegate and everything else, you can do that. In fact, one of the CEO right now, I've been working with him for about 4 months now. Every Friday after 1 o'clock, nobody sees him. He just goes to a Starbucks or one of the stores and spends 2-3 hours just thinking about the whole week, planning about the next week and everything else. And just to give you an example, he was planning, and initial plan was to close the year at 19 million, their sales. The last week he came back to me and he said, Raj, I'm closing at 24 million.
Wow.
Then I said, what changed? He said, you know what? Basically on the reflection, there are a couple of things we learned, and he went after he's in the construction business. So he's going after a couple of different clients because he could serve them very, very well. And that is showing up into the 24 million piece of it. So he was thinking initially that I'm going to be hands-on, and he used to be very, very busy. Now he started delegating. And the interesting part, there was one guy who was very, very good in his business. And he said, I'm delegating it to you to take care of it and come. And now since this person who was very qualified, very, very smart, he worked with a contractor of his, there was an opportunity. He didn't talk to anybody. He went and closed, and he has got a new deal for 1.8 million.
There you go.
Just delegating to the right person.
Yeah. And we talked about the power of reflection
Exactly.
not that long ago. And so check out that episode if you haven't listened to it or watched it. And then also you mentioned SWOT analysis. We talked about how to do a SWOT analysis not that long ago as well. So make sure you're going back. If you haven't seen some of these archived episodes, they build upon each other. So we want to continue to add value to you in many ways, and we'll refer to those prior episodes as often as we think of them. But that's great. Okay, so where are we at? We're on time and energy, leadership now?
Yes. In the leadership piece of it, one of the biggest thing is the balancing act. Thinking versus action or being. Those are all the things you need to balance, all of those things. The first thing about leadership is balancing that. And the second, be a role model. Really, your character is very, very critical because people will follow you. So make sure that you're always a great example for people to follow.
Yeah.
Focus on the team, focus on the goals rather than your personal power and personal grandeur. That is what I always go back and tell people.
So important.
You need to, for organizational excellence, that is your biggest focus. And then the next piece of it is basically being adaptable and adaptive leadership. Like we go back and talk about the psychometric profiles, right? There are sort of people with a different profile. Then you go back and work with them and be flexible enough to go back and work with them and feel comfortable with that.
And I think the key to that is you have to see the value in people that are different than you.
Yes.
And if you can see the value in them and recognize, if they're different than you, then they probably have strengths where you're weak. And so see the value in their perspective, in their viewpoint, in their skill set, and adapt to ultimately hit the result.
Yes. And one of the things I always tell people is basically when we go back and adapt, some people say, okay, do I go back and do this to go back and manipulate people? So what I tell people is you want to adapt, but without compromising your values or your belief system. That is one thing I want to add to people.
Yeah.
Because just for the sake of adapting and changing feels manipulative. So I want a lot of leaders is go back and never compromise on your values. Never go back and compromise on your belief system.
Yeah.
Be flexible, adapt, but without compromises. So that is a very, very critical point I tell people, and that is what leadership is all about.
Well, and maybe another way that might help some people too is I view it from a checkboxing standpoint. There are certain boxes that certain individuals need checked. For some people, they need detail box checked. And so you give them details. For other people, you need to show that you're confident in what you believe in and what you're communicating. And then they resonate off of that they resonate with that confidence, and it builds their confidence. They go, okay, I can believe them because they're confident in what they're talking about. And so that's a box that needs to be checked. For others, it's loyalty. For others, it might be, persuasion and hype and a big vision. And those are the boxes they need checked, and they'll sign up and run with you forever. But you have to understand, I don't see it as manipulation either. It's everybody has different boxes that need to be checked. Just like if you're selling a product to somebody, there's a different way based on that type of person of what boxes they need checked to feel comfortable making the purchase. The same thing with influence and leadership. there are certain things that will make a person feel more comfortable to move forward and take action. And that's what we want to do. We want to get people as leaders, we want to get them to a place where they feel comfortable and confident to move forward and take action. And
Yes.
there's just different ways of doing that for different people.
Exactly. And adding to that piece of it, the next piece of it is be very, very open for feedback. They need to constantly get inputs from everybody else so that they can go back and understand and then see how they can go back and change as well. Because every single person has some few blind spots. Some few
Absolutely.
blind spots don't affect you, then you don't need to change. Few affects you from your performance or leadership or things, then you need to work on that piece of it. And last but not the least, I tell from a leadership is always try to be on the optimistic side. Optimistic or realistic. Don't be a pessimist. When you are a pessimist, there is lack of motivation. People start losing hope. Most of the people are attracted to people who are more optimistic and realistic.
Yeah.
So that is one of the other things from a leadership is always bring hope to people. And that will really help to motivate and move people along the path.
That's so good. I was doing a training last Friday and I had a gal share a book I haven't read. Maybe you have, maybe some of the listeners have, but a book called The Happiness Advantage. And
yes, I have read the book.
Okay. She gave me her Cliff Notes version, but basically, if you maintain a level of happiness personally and then on a team, that team is more creative and more productive. And so, I mean, those are things that every entrepreneur needs in their growing, fledgling organization. They need creative people to solve problems in a creative way.
Yes.
And creative usually means lacking budget. And so that's even
radiating hope brings all of that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
wow.
Last but not the least is the perspective piece of it. One of the biggest things I go back and tell entrepreneurs is try to remain as humble as possible, down to earth.
Yeah.
You can go back and have a 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, but most of the people who have been successfully growing their business, all of them are very, very humble. So even in my corporate life, it was so easy for me to talk to a C-suite person because they were so humble rather than the middle managers who are more difficult to deal with.
Insecure and striving to try to climb up. Wow.
And that is the piece of it. And the next piece of it is really try to be a servant leader here. Enable others to thrive. Go back and give credit where credit is due.
Yes.
And really appreciate people. Align people's personal passions with the organizational goals. That way you can bring out the best in people. And if somebody is very, very ambitious and really have a lot of aspirations, encourage them, provide them the tools so that they can go back and be the best they can become.
Yeah. It's
very interesting. I am hiring a team in India to go back and do some of my support work. So this was a young lady basically whose English was not so great and stuff. So basically the team went back and they sidelined her. I said, tell me a little bit about this young lady. I spoke to her and said, hey, arrange for an interview. So we did a Zoom call and I was so based on her aspirations, based on her vision and what she wants to do in her life. She comes from a very, very humble family. So she worked very, very hard to get an MBA degree and everything else. So she has not gone to school until the bachelor's degree. She learned it in a native language of India. She never even learned English. She's learning English for her MBA degree.
Oh my goodness.
And still she used the tools, whatever it is, but with the communication was very good. And I told the team, you know what? She has got so much of grit. She has so much of this. I see a huge potential in her. I hired her. On the spot. Yeah. And that is what we want to go back and look at, because I hired her not for her skills today, but what she can be in the future. And that as a leader and a perspective, we need to constantly keep looking as well.
Yeah, that's good.
And then within the team, we need to have a good inner circle, because the most lonely person in the whole entrepreneur-led organization is the CEO or the entrepreneur. Because they can go back and discuss things, but they cannot really discuss all the things. Let us say, basically we lost a major deal and we'll have cash flow issues for 3 months. They can't go back and tell everybody in the company because some people might start leaving, somebody will be discouraged, there'll be a chaotic situation.
Yeah.
But they need somebody to discuss and come up with that. And that is where I go back and say, each one of the CEOs should have an inner circle. It can be inside the organization. I prefer outside the organization so that they can bounce ideas, get advice, things like that. And really, that becomes very, very important because that is the most lonely position in any company is the entrepreneur's role.
Yeah.
So they need to have that inner circle where they can feel comfortable bouncing ideas and things like that. And last but not the least, I tell people is the attitude of gratitude. Practicing gratitude is very, very critical. I am a big proponent of it. And I practice that regularly. And in fact, yesterday was exactly without missing a single day. I practiced attitude of gratitude for 365 days as of yesterday.
Wow.
And didn't miss a single day last year.
Look at you.
That is very powerful. Thank you.
That's fantastic. That's great. So we had setting the direction, aligning the people, mobilizing the team, engaging mastermind alliances, connecting with stakeholders, and enhancing personal effectiveness. That's what every entrepreneur needs to be thinking about, and the mindsets that they need to have to go along with it. That was fantastic, Raj. Any closing thoughts before we call it an episode today?
So I would go back and tell is people focus on finance, people focus on product and service and stuff like that. But what I would say is definitely give a lot of importance to these 6 steps as well. These are what I call the soft stuff, which people might not go back and look at it and jump at it. But if this is done very well and you have a foundation of this, your growth will be much faster, much smoother, and the rate of growth will be much higher.
That's good. That's perfect. Well, thank you all for listening to the Raj and Drew Show for Entrepreneurs. And if you found value in this episode, please share it with a friend, share it with a fellow entrepreneur that will find value in it as well. We want to equip you all, give you the tools required so you can be successful out there. So thank you so much, Raj. It's been a pleasure meeting with you again.
Thank you very much, Drew. It was a pleasure. And we always get excited to talk about entrepreneurship and share what we have. So this was one of the most fulfilling or exciting episodes for me as well.
Absolutely. It's always a joy to get together and share this stuff with you. Thank you all for listening. And we will talk to you on the next one.